The Road to Autonomy is presented by the Road to Autonomy Index. The Road to Autonomy Index is a rules-based equity benchmark index that measures the performance of a basket of global companies that are involved in the development and commercialization of autonomy. Institutional investors and fund managers are watching megatrends that are shaping investment opportunities today. These megatrends are creating thematic investment ideas and opportunities for forward-thinking investors. We believe that one of the biggest megatrends today is autonomy. That's why we created the Road to Autonomy Index, the world's first and only pure-play index to track the thematic investment opportunity in autonomy. Follow the Road to Autonomy Index on your favorite finance app by simply typing in the ticker Autonomy. To learn more about the Road to Autonomy Index, visit roadtoautonomy.com/index. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to welcome back David Welch, Detroit Bureau Chief Bloomberg. David, welcome back to the podcast.
Always great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's exciting to have you here because things are interesting in Detroit. The UAW strikes of the Big Three are currently ongoing, and there's been a lot of rhetoric on both sides. What is the latest on the UAW strikes?
So tomorrow at 10 a.m., Union President Shawn Fain is going to have one of his Facebook Live meetings. And on that meeting, he's either going to say, we're close enough to a deal where I'm not going to strike any more plants, or I'm adding more plants to the list of factories that are on strike because we're not close. And my guess is he will add more plants. Remember, they are striking one each at Ford, Stellantis, and General Motors. And they're all sort of like, they're plants that make a lot of money. It's the mid-sized pickups at GM, the Jeep Wrangler at Stellantis, and Bronco at Ford. But it's not the crown jewels. It's not the F-150 pickup, Silverado, Ram pickup. It's not one of those plants. So my guess is he will probably strike those. And the reason I say that is, I think progress has been made, but I was walking the picket line at Stellantis headquarters, North American headquarters, yesterday. And there were some bargainers on the line. And I said, so what's the holdup here? And they were talking about job security. Heretofore, the complaining and whinging and negotiating and back and forth barbs between everybody has been about pay. So it sounds like these 20% raises over 4 years that might get it done. I just didn't hear. It was a change in subject that they were talking about. Now it's about job security issues. So, but they did say the Stellantis offer made the other day would probably get turned down, and I think it already has. That says that they aren't at a deal, but I think progress is being made. But look, to some degree, the union had to walk out because the last two union presidents did jail time for stealing from the union. And I think the new regime had to prove that they're not in the back pocket of companies. They're not taking from anybody. They're negotiating in good faith to get these workers a good deal. So a strike was almost inevitable from that sense.
Why is Shawn Fain take this very aggressive approach? He didn't do the customary handshake. He's walked out on Bill Ford and Jim Farley.
Stood up Mary Barra, too.
Why?
So look, in addition to the fact that the past two presidents stole money, there is evidence that they also, particularly with what was then Fiat Chrysler, is now Stellantis, they had cozied up to management and accepted a weaker deal. And the workers don't trust union leadership. So in addition to the thievery, they think that union leaders were yucking it up and hanging out with management and too chummy and weren't really bargaining on their behalf. So Shawn Fain's got to show that he's not another management crony. He's a real union guy. Hence, no handshake. And when the initial demands, some of them, a lot of Americans thought were outrageous, like 4-day work week and 46% pay increase and all these things. Those were demands from the membership, a lot of them, that Shawn had collected himself. So he's trying to be voice of the people, credible to the people. This is the first labor talks I've ever seen that were so openly negotiated with both sides showing their latest offers. The union started that. Shawn Fain basically said, look, here's my opening offer. And then when he got counter offers from each company, he would show them online and then usually throw them in the trash or say that they were terrible, whatever. But he's trying to show the members, look, this isn't a behind the closed doors things where we emerge after a few weeks with a tentative agreement and tell you this is the best we can do. Here's what I offered. Here's what they're giving us. I think it sucks. We're going to push for more. And so that kind of transparent, all this is being done not only to get a good deal, I believe he sincerely wants that, but he has to rebuild credibility of union leadership with the members. Because remember, at the end of this, the members actually have to vote to ratify the deal. So, you gotta keep your voters happy. And he needs to run for re-election in 4 years if he wants to stay atop the union. So there's a lot of internal politics here that is now kind of being aired out.
Is this his Bernie Sanders moment?
Yes, and it's interesting you bring up Bernie, because not only has Bernie rallied twice with the union in downtown Detroit, but some of the public relations people worked with Bernie. And so if you listen to Shawn Fain, a lot of what he says is right out of Bernie's playbook, complaining about dividends and share buybacks and giving money to Wall Street investors and not paying out the employees, complaining about billionaires. That's all Bernie stuff. I mean, Elizabeth Warren, too, for that matter. It's been a common refrain for a lot of Democrats. But that was really Bernie's thing. The company's been hijacked by billionaires and Wall Street money men. And Shawn's had a pretty strong bunch of screeds along those lines. Now, it's not all wrong. I mean, GM's bought back billions in shares. And, they don't want to give, inflation protection to workers in the way of cost of living allowances. And the union's saying, wait a minute, I think it's over $20 billion in stock that GM's bought back. And frankly, I've always questioned the value of share buybacks just as a means to improve your share price, because clearly with GM, it really hasn't, those share buybacks have not had staying power for the share price, and I don't think they often do, but that's a different issue. The union just hates them generally. It's like, hey, take care of your employees first and then go buy back some shares for shareholders, is their view.
When you look at job security, how much this has to do with electric vehicles and the White House mandating them, because the electric vehicles are not going to have as many jobs?
Probably a fair bet. I mean, it's not like the union is saying, all right, electric vehicles are coming and we want you to guarantee employment levels at those plants. What they're saying is there are two different issues when it comes to job security and EVs. Auto companies allocating a vehicle or a transmission or something to be built in factory A, factory B, factory C, that means job security. And when you talk to union workers on the line, they'll say we want product. They don't really talk about it in terms of job security. They want a product there, and they know if there's a product there being built, and a product has a 6, 7, 8 year life cycle, and but these days it's 5, 6, 7. That's more than the life of an agreement. They know they're going to be working for a while. So that's one issue where they want job security guarantees. When it comes to EVs, it's more about pay, because you look at the workers at GM's Ultium battery plant in Ohio. They started at $15.50 an hour is the low wage. Now they're up to almost $20 as a starting wage. There was an interim agreement to get them there. But they're seeing battery workers making less money, and what the union thinks, rightfully so, is that a bunch of transmission and engine plants get shut down, get replaced with plants that make batteries and electric motors that are not owned by GM, Ford, and Stellantis, but some Korean entity or some joint venture or some such that pays less. That's what Shawn Fain and the union mean when they talk about a just transition to EVs. That you can't just use EVs as an excuse to pay people half the top wage now. That's the way they view this.
Well, then in that vein, why is Shawn Fain not attacking China? When you look at CATL, one of the largest battery manufacturers in the world, why is he not playing the China card?
Can't remember which movie it was. Might have been Outlaw Josie Wales, but the day ain't over yet. So, and I don't mean literally today, but I think this strike will end. There will be an agreement, and when that happens, Shawn will stop attacking the car companies, and he wants this to be more than just UAW President gets good contract. He wants to reignite a labor movement in America. And he's not the first one to do that. UPS just gave a very good contract to the Teamsters who threatened to strike. You've got the writers' strike in LA. You've got successful organizing going on at Apple, Facebook, Amazon. Son, I'm missing one. Who is it? It'll come to me. But, tech companies are now getting organized. So there's a lot of union activity out there. It's having a moment, and surveys show that more than half of Americans now favorably view labor unions, where it was about a third a few years ago. So he wants to be part of a resurgent total labor movement in the United States, and he has picketed with the Teamsters. There is a lot going on here. So I think once we're past this, he could start railing about China. And I think what all labor unions will do is make sure that we keep big tariffs on Chinese imported vehicles so that, at a minimum, if they're going to build them, they have to build them here.
The favorable views I think at some point it's going to change. Look at the economics around FedEx had their earnings today. They went up very well. The non-labor shop. They're gaining from UPS because the union negotiations. The union negotiation with the Teamsters with Yale, they bankrupted it and killed 20,000 jobs. And if you look at, you're on the strike line at one of the big three, you're only getting $500 a week. You have 13,000 individuals, costing the UAW $6.5 million a week. Everybody went on strikes and it cost $73 million a strike. There's only $825 million left in the bank. So you're looking at basically 10 weeks of full strike pay. You're going into Christmas. When do the members start to say, wait a second, look what the Teamsters did in killing jobs. We need to come to a compromise.
Well, so look, the math I have is if all three companies were struck at every plant, the strike, they could only go 7 weeks, and the union would totally deplete the fund. Now, there are Blue Cross Blue Shield workers represented by the UAW on strike in Detroit right now. They draw off the fund. There are aerospace plants that would draw off the fund if they were on strike. The union organizes many other types of workers. So a total strike of the big three would be even shorter because the union doesn't want to draw it down to zero. They can't, right? So that's why they started this rolling strike thing where they call it a standing strike. I call it a rolling strike, where they hit 3 plants, and then if they don't get what they want, they add some more. Much slower at depleting their coffers. But also, it is a strike. It is a serious issue, but you're talking about a plant each at the 3 car companies that's lost production now for 6 days. We've seen that from, for example, GM has a pickup truck plant in Fort Wayne, Indiana. They were down for 2 weeks because their supplier of steering columns had a problem. So we've seen more lost time from supply chain issues or weather than this strike is currently gone. So it's not hitting the companies as hard. So the companies can endure this for quite a while. I think the issue comes more just plain old fatigue. People get tired of negotiating. Workers get tired of the uncertainty. Companies and investors get tired of the uncertainty. And look, their job is to all stick this out and get the best deal for themselves. But it takes a toll.
What impact will have with the Ford Canada? That union looks like they're coming to an agreement. Will that have a little bit of impact?
I think it's more the other way around. I think those workers, there was clearly less of an appetite to strike, but they did want a pretty similar deal. And we'll see what the terms are. I don't think they've been disclosed. I haven't seen them yet. But, look, going into this strike, what people at all 3 of the companies told me is that they know that given the profits they've all had for the past 4 years, that they were going to have to pay some nice raises. They knew it was coming. And they didn't have an issue with that. It is some of this other stuff, 32-hour work weeks, so forth, that they were really getting a lot of pushback on.
You look at this from an investor standpoint. Do the big 3 start to look to ramp up work in right-to-work states, such as Tennessee, that you're seeing down the battery belt? Do we see more investments there, less investments in Detroit?
It could. I mean, this, no matter how you look at it, this will be an inflationary deal for the car company's costs. And, GM has said that they will guarantee work in all the plants they have here. But other than what they've already said they're going to invest for EV and battery plants in the U.S., I could see anything going forward that they have to look at Mexico at this point, even more over labor costs. The other factor, though, of course, is that the Inflation Reduction Act gives pretty heavy incentives, not just for consumers, but to the manufacturers for making their batteries in the U.S. So that's a strong incentive. If you don't make the batteries and the ingredients here or get them from our friendly trading partners, you lose out in money under a clause called 45X that goes straight to the companies, and instead of $7,500 to all your car buyers, it could be $3,750 or something less. And no one's going to want to leave that money on the table.
It's a big difference. You're not going to leave the money on the table, but if Shawn Fain continues the tactics, they're going to have to do something at some point. And then you want to look at tactics or antics. I don't know what term to use for you, but former President Trump's going to Detroit on September 27th to give a speech to the UAW. It's politics, but what is he trying to achieve?
Look, he wants all the working class votes he can get in a swing state. So, look, Trump's good at marketing himself. He's also, whether you like him or not, you have to admit the guy is good at cranking up anger and fear. And he's always done that very well, and that gets him votes. And so the anger and fear that he's peddling with union workers is that Biden's encouragement of EVs is a job killer. And so early on in this conversation, you were saying that we'll need fewer people to make EVs. He'll be trumpeting that, and really talking up the idea that everything Biden's pushing is just going to cost union workers jobs. I had a conversation recently with a top executive, I mean very top, at one of the three companies. Won't name the person, but the person said in their life they never thought they would see the politicization of cars, namely electric vehicles. And we have seen that. Look, I think neither company would really admit this probably, or if they did, they would not express it this way. But when GM, their first EV was the Hummer, I thought that was a way of kind of reaching across the aisle. Because look, a lot of Democrats, a lot of liberals, a lot of green geeks absolutely would want to buy an EV. But people who drive pickup trucks and big luxury vehicles and maybe subscribe to the party that doesn't subscribe to global warming, climate change, are less interested in EVs. I mean, you can't spend billions and billions of dollars investing in a new type of vehicle if half the country is doubtful they should ever own it. So you put an electric drivetrain in something like a Hummer, you're appealing straight to the people who drive gas-guzzling big trucks to say, hey, you can do an EV too. It can be cool for you. Now, the other company, and look, I do believe that Elon Musk's whole Twitter thing and his very public move, I think rightward in terms of politics, although I've always thought Elon's not a Republican or a Democrat. He's an Elonitarian, which is like a combination of libertarian, but it's really the politics of whatever Elon needs that day. I do believe going to Twitter and taking away some of what people saw was social censorship of conservative views is on his mind. I do believe he also hates government regulation, and the Democrats always get tagged with that. So I think there are some ways he personally did move to the right. But remember, Elon is extremely impulsive, and that would explain a lot of the right-wing things that he said. But also, he's a brilliant marketer, and he's tactical. When he smokes pot with Joe Rogan, that was about, I think, perpetuating his image as the anti-CEO. The Detroit, the Stuttgart, the Tokyo CEOs all said, you can't make profit on EVs, and you can only make small ones that are compacts that only geeks drive. And he said, nope, you can make them roomy, you can make them cool, and he did. And he made money on them. He was the anti-CEO for conventional car companies, and all the stuff he does on a personal level and on Twitter, I think, sort of perpetuated that image, which separated his company's image as a real maverick. And that's their brand image. They're the tech maverick. So I think a lot of this goes together. And what does that have to do with politics? I think Elon's shift to the right is reaching out to people on the right who may not care about climate change, but they'll take an interest in him, and then they'll take an interest in his company and his products. I think Elon saw that it was getting politicized as well, EVs, and I think that's part of it. He might not articulate it that way. That's the net effect in any case, right? He now has a lot of fans on the right, and those people might look at his cars because they like him.
Yeah, I mean, it's been reported, several outlets or your colleagues at Bloomberg that have reported, no matter how the strike ends, Tesla's clearly a beneficial winner. And I agree with that. Would you agree that Tesla's a winner no matter how this ends? Yeah,
they are in the sense that their labor costs are already cheaper, so the disparity gets that much bigger. There is a mitigating factor to this, though, and we'll see if it happens. Toyota, Honda, Korean automakers, German automakers who have plants here, they've always had to raise their wages to keep the UAW out of their plants. So in a sense, the UAW's pay package has set the standard for automaking workers industry-wide. And I think, the other companies, Shawn Fain's an aggressive union president. He's going to try to organize these companies again. And if they want to keep the union out, they have to show the workers that you don't need the UAW to get a good pay package. I think Tesla's tougher to do that with because, you can give workers stock that's worth a lot of money. And that's another way to keep the union out. But there may be wage pressure for that reason.
Elon did that tweet the other day about how many members on the line became millionaires because of the Tesla stock. So why are you going to unionize who became millionaire working on the line? It will be interesting to see how this goes, how it evolves. And then if you look at what the Fed's trying to do, we're at 5.25%, 5.5%. They're going to be extremely hawkish to potentially 26. Does this pay increase add to the inflationary environment in the U.S. economy?
It doesn't help. And look, the short answer is yes. The question I have is to what degree? So, autos are 3% of GDP. It's not a huge thing. If it pushes other companies to raise wages, it will have an impact. I don't see it being a huge factor, but it will. I mean, look, anything that pushes wages up can do that. I mean, look, we're still in a tight labor market. I think that above all else is keeping wages and keeping inflation up. It's still an employee's market.
Is Powell and the Fed, in your opinion, going to be able to orchestrate a soft landing?
I've listened to all the theories on both sides on this. I think the majority of economists are still saying soft landing. I think so just because everybody's working. Like unemployment's very low. And as long as everybody has a job, it's really tough to drag down inflation and drag down the economy. Inflation has slowed, but we're still seeing some inflation.
The bottom line is the Fed's going to have to remain hawkish to try and beat this. When you look at Tesla, I don't consider them an electric vehicle company anymore. If you look at the majority of headlines, the majority of the press coverage, it's all about FSD. Do they just become a self-driving car company at the end of the day? From the public's perception, not necessarily investors' perception. I know we have the Tesla bulls on one side that are valuing what FSD could be. But are they going to be perceived as just a self-driving car company, not an EV company?
Given the failures they've had with autopilot and FSD, how could they possibly be viewed that way? I mean, the system doesn't work. It's not full autonomy. So
people believe it,
how
though.
do you get there?
I don't see how you get there without LiDAR, but consumers are buying it, believing it, and you're seeing incidents where people do silly, stupid things, believing that it's full self-driving, but you and I both know it's not. But if you look at what Elon's doing with FSD, you look at what he did with EVs, he forced the hand for the big automakers how to make electric vehicles. Is he going to do the same thing with licensing?
I mean, will Cruise and Waymo and those guys license their technology as a revenue stream?
Yes.
Yeah, I think they will. Well, Waymo definitely, because they're not a car company. All of the standalone AV companies. Cruise, that's interesting. So, look, they'll definitely license it to Honda. They already are. But Honda's a part owner in Cruise and a partner with GM and a lot of other stuff. GM sees this as a potential big advantage for them, especially if they sell, personally driven or in this case ridden AVs. So this is the age-old quandary for GM, and it goes back to OnStar. Their ultimate decision on OnStar was keep it in-house, keep it just for us, and that was the wrong move. It never really grew. It never became. It's not a terrible business for them. It makes money, from what I understand. But the telecom guys, they had several offers from Verizon to just buy the thing and really grow it. So do they make that same mistake? I do think they will spin it out at some point. And when they do that, and they have a CEO who is not a GM executive, who is not beholden to General Motors, but beholden to a public shareholder base and a board of directors, then they will. Not only will they want to, but they will have to seek new customers to license the technology to.
I agree that we're seeing pressure inside of Alphabet. TCI Fund Management took a decent stake, and they wrote a letter to the board of Alphabet telling Waymo to cut costs and figure out revenue. Now that Ruth Port's chief investment officer and president of Alphabet, does that get accelerated? And then if Waymo does license the stack, does the domino effect then start in the industry?
It could. If one gets out there, does everybody else want to kind of get a licensing deal while the getting's good? It really could. And I think that's the way it will be for the trucking companies. I spoke to Kodiak recently, and I don't know if they call it licensing, but they're definitely not selling a product. They want to just install the system and manage the service for their trucking clients. To me, that's a pretty similar business model to licensing out your AV system. And look, it works in trucking because the trucking companies don't want to develop this. They want someone else. They don't have anywhere near the skills to do it either, nor would they want to invest in it. So could that happen with robotaxi kind of stuff? Yeah, I think it could. Look, consumers do love Super Cruise and Blue Cruise, these systems. That's for certain. And it's a pretty decent moneymaker, I think, for General Motors and probably for Ford. Certainly for Tesla, they've sold a lot of them when it didn't even work. Actually, they sold it when it didn't even exist. So clearly there's a business here for people to have their own personally owned vehicle able to drive itself. I wouldn't mind it. I mean, I love to drive, and I'm a manual transmission geek. I'm a true automotive Luddite. But if I'm on a road trip, my daughter's in college now, and I have to drive 4.5 hours to see her. Yeah, I wouldn't mind zoning out, reading a book, catching up on email, watching soccer, watching baseball while I'm in the car. That'd be great, especially if the Yankees actually sign some real players in this coming offseason and get rid of some of the dead wood on their roster.
Absolutely. Then the Yankees need dump analytics while they're at it.
Yes.
And go back to the
first
Gene
guy
Michael
they should
days.
cut is whoever this analytical guy is who keeps telling Cashman to sign all of these sick note players who can't stay on the field.
No, they got to go. You bring up a great point with Kodiak around licensing. I think they call it the Kodiak driver. They have the CTO, Andy, who's building a really great scalable stack. And then they have James Reed, who came out of JP Morgan Chase, and then he was at USA Truck. That's the business model, because that's scalable. Imagine, hypothetically, they license it to UPS or to FedEx. That's a big business. Then at that point, do they get software multiples when they go public, if that is the business?
I asked Don Burnett that recently, and, he's not going to break news in a conversation. He says they don't need the money right now. And look, I think eventually they do, but I think wait and see is the best way to do it. Right now, the market is still either down or just not paying any attention to autonomy. I mean, the market thinks it's basically a bunch of sunk capital and that may in technology that may or may not work, and even those who think it will work don't see it as investable at the moment because there's just time uncertain and regulatory landscape uncertain as to when it'll all come together. And that's pretty logical, honestly. So I was at Arts 2023 this year, and one of the last panels they had, it was right before Alan Owensman and I closed the joint down. They had an investor panel, and they all said that, look, they like the technology, but they don't know when it's going to return anything and generate real revenue, so they're hanging and waiting. So if I'm any of these companies, including Cruise, I wait on that. So there is sort of three things that need to all happen in a timely fashion for these companies. They need to show results, technological results, first of all. They need to stop running into fire trucks and running into emergency zones and doing stupid things like that, running over people's dogs. I mean, AVs are safer. You look at San Francisco, there have been no fatal accidents. The technology's safe, but it does dumb things that are intolerable. I mean, I think I told you the story when I was teaching my daughter to drive, and she took a right turn into an oncoming lane. There was nobody there. We were turning into a mall, and I said, okay, calmly pull over to a parking space here. And I said, no, listen to me. I don't need you to practice and get better at making right turns and making turns into the right lane. I don't need you to do that. I don't need you to slowly improve and work on it. That can't happen. That cannot happen. If someone was coming out, we're in a head-on collision. It's not something you work on and think about. You don't do it. You cannot turn into the wrong lane. So if you run an AV company, you can't run into fire zones. It can't happen. I'm sorry. Okay. There are fender benders where nobody gets hurt and the companies are very good at avoiding stuff, but like this stuff, it can't happen. It's just the public image of it is bad, and you just can't interfere with cops and firemen trying to do their job. So when they stop doing that, when trucking companies can go node to node or door to door even, and it works really well, so then investors get interested. And then you can do things like, maybe spin out, or you can do IPOs, or sell, partially take some of it public. And that part of it needs to happen too. And then it all needs to happen before these companies spend so much money on it that parent companies like GM or, the brain trust at Alphabet decides it's too expensive. All this needs to go down, but, in a time frame that the people currently spending money on development, still have patience for it.
I think it's investable, and I'm not the only one. I'm investing in it. SoftBank's also investing in it. You broke this story with Brian Selesky and Pete Renner for Stack AV up to $1 billion. I've heard they have about 100 million now, and there's a credit line up to $1 billion. Are they too late?
That's a really great question. It's one I thought about a bit when it was coming out. So that, they want to do trucking, and you've already got. Okay, well, let me take a step back. 6 months ago, I would have said they're too late. But Waymo pulled out, right? Via's shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a big player with a lot of money who's pulling out of it, filling that void. Our Stack could fill that void. Not that you need to sub one for one into the lineup, but I think that does leave us room for another player because, look, there's some other players. You got Wabi. I think Too Simple's for sale. I'm not sure anything happens there. But active players developing something and getting stuff on the road. You got Aurora. You have Kodiak. Wabi's developing some interesting technology. And who am I missing here that's really in the U.S.?
Torque backed by Daimler.
Yeah. But, they were also working with Via. So weren't they Daimler?
Daimler was, yes. Daimler had the OEM deal.
So, but it's a much smaller field. So there is room for somebody. What we don't know, the old Argo had good technology, but it was robotaxi and good still, and last mile. Can they do something better than the other AV trucking companies are right now? Do they have better people and better technology? I don't know the answer to that. My guess is they've got some time, or they've got some space to make up, and it's going to take them time to do that on these other players who've been working with AV trucking for a while. But then, you think about it, Aurora had sort of pivoted away from robotaxi to get into trucking. They're doing both, but they haven't been at trucking all that long either. Really, has Kodiak been at it the longest of everybody who's actually out there doing something?
Torque has been at the longest, but that goes back to the robotaxi days. And I believe Kodiak, if you look at just pure truck, is the longest, the elder statesman.
So it's a pretty open field, especially considering it's all kind of test fleets right now. I don't think they're too late, but they got to move if they want to catch up.
The common denominator this is going to come down to people, technology, business model. What Kodiak did right, they hired James Reed from the trucking industry. You have to have clear trucking talent that could speak trucker. That's going to make a huge difference in all this. And the business model. Kodiak's business model being a service is very similar to what Peter von Schmidt's developing at Torque. That's going to be interesting. And then you have Wabi cutting a deal with Uber Freight. I'm not sure the economics of that deal. But at the end of the day, if you can get a trucker to speak trucker and license it, you got a potential very profitable business.
Mm-hmm. Look, the thing about Kodiak's business model, that's just, there's no capital, right? Their trucking customers provide all the big, heavy, expensive hardware. They just do the integration and the work. And then they collect money. Assuming it all works. And I think that's what the tech companies should be doing. Because acquiring the talent and doing the testing costs enough without having all this hardware in there.
Looking on the hardware, Kodiak has a patent on sensor pods. Does that become a competitive advantage? It's only 3 bolts. They were very kind to host me in Dallas, and I was able to do a pull-up on it. It's really incredible. There's 3 bolts that holds it on, and the trucks can drive itself. Does that sensor pod become their competitive advantage? Because let's say UPS, they ship 200,000 sensor pod for 100,000 trucks. And they get a licensing fee. That's interesting because there's no more unibrow. There's no more massive retrofit. It's just 2 sensor pods and away it goes. And word on the street is it works on cars too.
That is interesting. I don't know how it compares to what others are working on or what they have. I don't know if it's an advantage. I think it's a pretty good piece of hardware, though. The more you can condense that stuff, the better off you are. And that's where it's all going.
That's where it's going. And then because you have the technician issues. That's why Ryder is very interesting because they're going to do the maintenance. And it's all outsourced. Everything becomes outsourced. And if you can outsource all this, you can just do it as a service, you can scale your business for less capital and make it more efficient.
That's right. I mean, you would use your capital for technological development and marketing and mapping, expanding new routes, new markets for your stack, right? And also eventually the kind of hardware that can see through northern weather, right? Because that still seems to be something everybody is shying away from. You know, when people ask me, like, is this the end of truckers as a way to make a living? And I said, not up north it isn't, because the trucks are a long way away. Not where you and I are from.
No, no, they're not going on the black guys just yet. Maybe some point in the future, but not today. Let's hypothetically say the trucking model that Kodiak's developing is highly profitable, highly scalable. They IPO at some point in the future, and they're profitable. Does that put pressure on the robo-taxi side to embrace a different model?
Not, I mean, I don't know about pressure, because at this point, they're two different businesses, right? Like, I see Cruise and Waymo about as competitive with Kodiak and Aurora as Chevrolet and Toyota are with PACCAR and Volvo Truck, right? The only thing they probably compete for are engineers, talent. But because look, as we've seen, it's just, I don't think it's that easy to pivot from one to the other. There are obviously a lot of principles, but each one requires skills, experience, talent, data that the other one doesn't have. So, I mean, not that it can't be done, it certainly can. But, I mean, you know, look, when Aurora decided to emphasize trucking, they haven't ditched robotaxi, but they certainly are putting more of their resources and time into trucking. And they're probably the best example. If it was really easy just to pivot from one to the other, they'd probably be developing similar plans to deploy and doing it at a pretty rapid pace. And for that matter, Waymo probably would still keep Via, and Cruise might have pivoted into trucking. I think it takes a lot.
It takes a lot. You talk to a lot of the engineers. Chuck Price, one of them, says that there's no such thing as a universal driver. They had more resources than anybody, and it failed.
You and I are good drivers of cars. I can't drive a rig, can you?
Nope.
Now, people in autonomy who develop this stuff might say I'm overly simplistic, but I also think they would agree that, and what most people have told me, just like you've heard, there is no universal driver. There are a lot of differences.
So that, going back to Stack, it's basically the ex-Argo team. Brian's been calling all of his old friends and colleagues and inviting him back. How's that going to work? To me, that you're looking at, what, a 3 to 4 year catch-up period? Because it's a completely different center suite, completely different approach, completely different tech stack, and you're going to have to build it from the ground up again. And if you look at Argo didn't go very fast. That's true.
Well, part of that may have been that, you know, Ford and Volkswagen had cold feet for about that last year they were in. But okay, I don't know what other talent they brought in with Argo to pivot into trucking. But I think we know that they have brought on a lot of the same people. There could be a pretty long runway for them to take off and get back into this game. The good news for them is, you know, like we're saying, though, there aren't that many players left in the game.
No.
With AV trucking, and that's where the opportunity is.
That's the opportunity. Is the question of how patient will Massa be?
Well, he wasn't patient with Cruise, but then again, he had issues at the time with liquidity, and they had to sell off some assets. What I've heard is they're in this for 7 or 8 years, but again, I heard that with them and Cruise too. In fact, that's what they put in the contracts. Is, you know, they were going to be in it for a while. It sort of depends on whether or not SoftBank has learned from their last go around, where they were, you know, they were putting money into everything they could find practically. I mean, and I think that's why they got in the trouble they were in. They were investing in so many places, and that they probably spread themselves too thin. If they're kind of throttling back a bit and taking a more venture cap or private equity type, you know, 5+ year investment horizon, that would be the smart thing to do with this, and they certainly have the cash to do it.
They just had the ARM IPO as well, so they had an infusion of cash. It's still on 90% of ARM, even though it's floated on the NASDAQ. This has been a long time coming. For the last 5 to 6 years, Mazda's been going around with a $700 million war chest to invest in autonomous trucking. So this has been a long time coming for them. And if you look at the regulatory environment in Japan, Japan's open to autonomy. They're building freeways with autonomous lanes only. You have the 3 big Japanese trading houses, which Buffett all is invested in. They're investing in the space. Is the play with Mazda to develop Stack and then export it to Japan?
That's a good question, because what is the regulatory landscape? And also, the trucks are different over there. I think they're smaller, and I think it's tough driving in Japan. I've been to Japan, but I didn't have to do the driving. It's very dense over there. So is AV trucking in Japan sort of like AV trucking here with a dash or robotaxi, just because you're in tighter quarters, particularly in the cities, and everything's so dense there that it's just tough for driving. I think even for trucks, unless you're staying highway only. But no, you could. I mean, and you probably need AV trucking there for the same reasons you need it here, maybe even more with the density.
They have a driver shortage in Japan as well. Yes, very dense, but they're building dedicated lanes on their highways. If you put a depot on each end of that lane on a dedicated lane, that's a very interesting business.
That I could see happening for sure.
And so we'll see where Mazda goes. We'll see where this technology goes. What are you looking for towards the end of the year as it relates to autonomy?
They asked me the same thing at Arts 2023, and I kind of figure. Well, at the time, at Arts 23, I said stretch out and wait, because we're still, with a lot of the AV companies, there's a lot of wait and see, a lot of development to be done, and a lot of prove it factors to happen. And the U.S. regulatory scheme hasn't been totally figured out at the federal level, and not at every state level either. So, but what Cruise is doing makes the second half of the year, or second to the last quarter of the year, really interesting. They've got these issues in San Francisco. I think they're serious issues with how their cars react to safety vehicles, emergency vehicles. But I also think that the image and some of the criticism may be a bit overblown, in the sense that the vehicles have been pretty safe in terms of their accident, injury, fatality rates, that sort of thing. In fact, there haven't been any fatalities. And same with Waymo. So they're going full steam ahead into all these other cities. To me, this story for autonomy the rest of this year and into next is how Waymo's vehicles perform in some of these cities that are, frankly, much easier to drive in than San Francisco. And you and I have had this discussion a million times. Why are they in San Francisco? Why didn't they? I mean, their explanation is, if you can drive there, you can drive anywhere. And my counter is, why don't you drive anywhere and then figure out San Francisco? And so, it would have been an easier path, and they'd probably be monetizing more in other cities and learning from, mistakes that are, probably easier to correct and less dense, less compact, less hilly, less difficult than San Fran. But anyway, they're gathering data, Seattle, Raleigh, Washington, D.C.
15 cities, 10 states.
Yeah. No, they're not going to be in all those cities anytime soon, because they have to gather data, and then they have to unpack, and then they have to build vehicles. This rollout takes a bit of time, but I'd say, so the next 12 months, that's going to be, until further notice, the story in autonomy.
What happens if Gavin Newsom vetoes AB 316?
I think he will. That takes some pressure off these companies. Even though that does deal with trucking, I think it sends a signal to some of the regional regulatory authorities in California that the governor is serious about fostering this technology and not being so picayune with the companies that are doing it.
It's a positive for the industry, and it's a positive for the investors that are looking to invest in it. And hopefully more governors will look at it. You have a very progressive governor in California that vetoed it because he sees the benefits of the technology, and it's going to be interesting.
Look, there is a recognition that not all of the criticism Waymo and Cruise have gotten in San Francisco is pure, right? There's there's a lot of politics that deal with unions, that deal with the MTA. That's the Municipal Transit Authority losing revenue to first Uber and Lyft and now to robotaxis. There's a lot of politics at play there, but there are legitimate safety concerns too. It's one of these things where you can't dismiss the concerns based on the politics because there are real issues.
If you weren't in San Francisco, I don't think we'd be having a lot of these issues, and we wouldn't probably be having this conversation right now either.
I know, we'd be talking about the Yankees.
Exactly. And what are we going to do next year? And we'll have you on again in January to kick the year off. And David, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
Keep an eye on Cruise for the reasons I said. Keep an eye on Waymo too. I think they've got a lot going for them at the moment. I'm surprised they haven't announced expanding into more cities, but I think that's going to happen. And, I would keep an eye on Kodiak because it looks like they're emerging as, someone who's, the company that's most rapidly deploying and they're going driverless, I think, next year is my recollection from.
Yeah, I think Q4.
Yeah, I'd keep an eye on that too and to see how that does. Because the rubber is literally starting to meet the road when it comes to AV trucking, and I think Kodiak's the one that's going to be doing it. I mean, Aurora too. They always get mad when I don't mention them, unless we mention them in their cost cutting and cash raising and sale plans. But they're going to be deploying as well in 2024. It's a big year for them. So 2024 will be an interesting year for AV trucking pilots and removing drivers and getting things rolling.
2024 will be a big year for autonomy. Keep your eyes on Cruise, Waymo, and Kodiak. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is a profitable business. David, thanks so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed listening, please kindly rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Road to Autonomy, or email podcast@roadtoautonomy.com. The Road to Autonomy podcast is produced by the Road to Autonomy LLC. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect those views of the Road to Autonomy, its subsidiaries, its shareholders, directors, investors, or partners. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be taken as legal, investment, tax, or business advice. Nothing is a recommendation that you purchase, sell, or hold any security or other investment, or that you pursue any investment style or strategy. The content of this podcast is presented on an as-is basis with no warranties, express or implied, of any kind. Financial mentions about companies in the Road to Autonomy Index and discussions about the Road to Autonomy Indexes are for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon when making any investment decision. Furthermore, an inclusion of security within the Road to Autonomy Index is not a recommendation by the Road to Autonomy Indices, LLC, to buy, sell, or hold that such security, nor is it considered to be investment advice.